what does accurate deployment of flow look like for you? How do you kind of look at your day and decide, this is where I want to get into flow, this is what's going to be highest impact? How do you do that?
Yeah. So a lot of, and it's interesting to be having this conversation now to where, because some of this is really shifting for me as my team grows, as the organization sort of expands, which is something, we can talk about actually, because it's something that's covered in some of the coursework. But what I'll say specifically is for, I really do kind of put an emphasis, put a premium on those activities like writing, like that, or just story craft, world building, sometimes world building on behalf of a client. That is such deep work and takes so much focus and attention and energy that I now have to set aside, and now actively set aside time to do that, to focus on that. I have my blocks of writing time, or my blocks of, if it's on behalf of a client, to actually work on, their kind of narrative framework and invest myself in that. Whereas I think the way I was, trained professionally was sort of, you fit you have your deadline coming, and you fit those in the little pockets in between interviews and meetings and whatever, and you just sort of cobble this together. And so the thing that happens, right, is, you're robbing yourself of the opportunity to truly go into flow with the work. If you're like, okay, I only have, whatever, an hour to work on this until my next phone call. And then and then after that phone call, I have to run this meeting, but then I can get back to the project, and hopefully I'll get into flow when I get back to it. But if I don't, then, then after the call after that, I will definitely, right. And so by setting aside the time to actually immerse yourself in the work, it allows you to kind of tap in and channel kind of that flow energy and really do that.
I think that so many people struggle with this, where you are a leader, you have a team, you're running a business, but you also really do need time for flow because you have creative work to execute.
And there's a tendency for those of us who are wired in a certain way to be like, okay, well, I know how this is supposed to play out, so let me just take over for a little bit and I'll show you, right? And so again, that's depriving your team of the opportunity to learn. It's depriving yourself of the opportunity to get in flow. And it's also depriving yourself of, letting somebody do the job you hired them to do, right? So being able to kind of take that step back and say, okay, I'm gonna delegate, I'm gonna trust, in my judgment of hiring these people.
And I think a lot of time, part of the reason is, it's part of my identity, and I feel really validated, and I understand who I am in this organization because I do this thing really well. So there is a transition period that can be really uncomfortable as you start to reshape that. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, that's exactly it. And there was a real kind of exploratory process, because I feel like if I had just left that to its own devices, right, the default would always be to go back to the musician.
I'll just do it.
Yeah, I'll just do it. Or I know how to figure this out, so I've got it covered, right?
Yeah. The struggle is real. I was working with another client in climbing Mount Bold recently, and he came to the table after he was running this experiment of, empowering his team and not jumping in to take over when things started to go wrong. And he said, I'm learning that I need to let the fires burn a little longer, right? You can't rush in to me too. You can't rush in to put the fires out. You have to let the fires burn, because that's what's going to give your team that ownership, right? And it's a group flow trigger for some accountability and ownership and autonomy to actually solve it themselves. And that builds trust.